Welcome back to the show. I am your host, Ally Maz, coming to you live from Long Island, New York. I am currently at my in-laws' house sitting on a Paw Patrol bed. I did take the poster down because I didn't think it would look so good for those of you who are watching this on YouTube. But I'm in my nephew or their little grandchild's room. It's very sweet. And it's another solo episode, but this episode is going to be a bit of a different format. So, as always, I'd love to hear from all of you if this is something that you'd like after you finish listening to the episode. But I wanted to bring you a little bit more of a workshop style episode. So, this episode is all about the seasons of our cycles and how our menstrual cycle connects us to the moon and which moon we're bleeding on, how that has an impact on where we're at in our own life and our own expression and in our own leadership. If you've listened to the podcast before or you are a student of mine, you know that this relationship between our cycles and nature is so very, very important to me. And I have a workshop called The Seasons of Cycles. I lead it often on retreat. I also lead it corporately. I also tell people about it all the time. It's just one of my favorite topics. So I thought it would be a cool way to bring to you as a podcast. So, the first thing I want to set you up for this little hybrid workshop podcast, something to inquire about is what is your current relationship with your cycle? And I like this question because it's kind of something maybe we don't even think about. A lot of us are conditioned to hate our periods. A lot of us are conditioned to feel like it's just this pain every single, I mean, it could be quite literally a physical pain every single month, but mentally, emotionally, physically, we can be really disconnected from our cycle, therefore thinking it's just a curse. And you'll start to see there's this little bit of information I want to share with you is that the word taboo. So sometimes we think about talking about periods as taboo, but the word taboo itself originates from a Polynesian term, tabua, which also means menstruation and sacred blood. I think this the first time I ever came across someone sharing this word with me or this history was Mickey Agrawal. She is the original founder of Thinx, which is a period underwear company. She's no longer with them, but I heard her speak at an event that we were both speaking at actually. And I was like, damn, this idea that the word tabua meant blood or sacred blood ends up being this word to describe things we shouldn't really talk about. So I think that's really fascinating. And if you listen to the podcast episode I did with Mara Branscombe, we talk a lot about the archetypes of women. The archetypes of women can be so vast and varied, but we see these four archetypes of maiden, mother, mega, and crone. And they also are representative of the seasons. So we're going to look at the seasons. We're going to make lots of different connections, lots of symbolism here, but we're going to start here with this idea of how the four main female archetypes are connected with the seasons. So if I'm leading this like a workshop, the next slide is really what does it mean to be a cyclical being in a linear world? Meaning we are cycling every single day. Our bodies are different. Those of you that are uterus havers and have a menstrual cycle, we are cycling and we're cycling with the moon. Whereas if you are assigned male at birth, you are in a male body or have male reproductive hormones, you are cycling with the sun. And I'm going to get a little deeper into this. But did you know that we have our periods for an average of 3,500 days in our lifetime, which is 10 years? So you have your period for 10 years straight. It's a long time. So being at war with your period, having it be this thing that you hate, you despise, it's awful, it's challenging, it's something you want to just get over with and just deal with and move on. You think about that if you condense it into 10 years, how intense that can be. You're going to spend 10 years at war with yourself or at war with this thing. So I'm hoping that today's episode provides you a little bit more information about how this time can be so sacred. So we're going to start first with the menstrual phase, which is winter. So, if you ever go to the doctor and they're like, what day of your cycle are you on? And you're like, I have no idea. Winter is day one. Day one of your cycle is the day where you first start bleeding. This is known as your menstrual phase. And if you think about winter, you think about the attributes of winter. And, I love talking about winter. I love the idea or the concept or the spiritual meaning of winter, which is really to sit still and to rest and to nourish yourself, to eat warming and grounding foods, to stay in, to hibernate, to let go, to create your own sort of inner ceremony, inner connection with yourself. So, this is really a time to come in. This is not a social time. This is a time where you are paying attention to what your body needs. And I like this little tip in Chinese medicine. They say cold feet equals cold uterus. So, this is time to put your socks on, to stay warm, to use a heating pad. Um, this is a time of our cycle that needs extra care. And what I notice specifically in women in the workforce specifically, where they're not giving themselves this time to rest, when they're not giving themselves the luxury of pulling the reins in a little bit, this is where we tend to burn out. Because if we have cycle after cycle after cycle where we are not taking care of ourselves, the body is going to start to feel that. And I talked about this in this TikTok. I probably talked about it a little bit here on the podcast, but I made a TikTok about this idea of, are you acting like summer when it's winter? And that's meaning, we're going to talk about a lot of different metaphors. I'm meaning this as your menstrual cycle, yes, but I'm also talking about the season itself. The season itself requires more rest. And if you are going to burn the candle at both ends all winter long, and then you get to spring, which has the rebirth quality and more light, and then into summer and then into fall, you're going to exhaust yourself. So winter is the bleed. It is the time of your menstrual blood. It is the time to come in and get rest. So there's a few things that we can do to use the wisdom of winter and to work with our periods. And one of them is looking at the products that we're using. I have been someone who has used a menstrual cup for, I don't know, probably the last 10 years. There's many things I like about it. One is that there's no waste, which is fantastic. The other is that you buy it one time, you have it forever, unless you lose it, which I sometimes tend to do. And I'm like, oh, I don't know where that went or who found that, but and it's a nice way to collect blood. And why would you do that, you ask? Well, again, we're talking about taboo subjects, tabua, sacred blood. When we collect the blood, we can actually use it in our garden. We can give it back to the earth. So you can take the menstrual blood, put it into a mason jar. This is what I do. Fill that mason jar up with water. So you have this mixture, and you can give that mixture to your indoor plants, or you can put it into your garden. And it actually helps your plants fertilize and grow. So, hot tip. You might be listening to this thinking, oh, dear God, that is way more information than I needed. And it's interesting to look at our own bias with this and why we think that's so weird and why we're uncomfortable with this topic. So it goes back to the same question that I asked at the beginning is, what is your relationship to your cycle? Another thing that we can use and do with the sacred blood is to put it on our face. Oh my God, what are you talking about? What do you mean? The blood has stem cells in it. So it's really rejuvenating and a powerful thing for our skin. If you don't believe me, you can, obviously do your own research. You do not have to take everything I'm saying as truth. But there's definitely some powerful information out there that supports all of this. And when we're using tampons or sort of stuffing things into our body, we're not getting that same trickle down of the blood down into the vagina and out. And so that stem cells aren't getting absorbed into the body which really benefits us. So something to think about is free bleeding. So the other option, if you're not into using a cup, is period underwear, which I mentioned, or reusable pads that can be washed. So, looking at our environmental impact is really important. And just even the way that we're working with our periods, or even seeing the blood, or being in connection to it versus just being this thing that we're not seeing, that we feel disconnected to. And tampons and pads work, they're part of what we probably all grew up on, but looking at if they are made with organic cotton, because a lot of these products have different chemicals and different bleaches in them to bleach the cotton. And we're putting them in these very sensitive, sacred places within ourselves. And so you might not want to put something that's laden in chemicals. Something to think about is what type of products that you are using and putting into your body. And the last little piece here around the winter. So everyone's cycles are the timing of the cycle is different, but we're going to talk about this as looking at as a month. So let's call winter, or your period, day 1 to day 7. It could be shorter, it could be longer, but we're looking at it as that entire week. I like to not plan anything in the winter of my cycle. Yeah, some things are unavoidable. Yes, sometimes does it land when I'm leading a retreat? Yes, sometimes does it land when I'm traveling? Yes, sometimes does it land if I have to film? Yes, sometimes it's not, we can't avoid it. But there are moments where I can look at my calendar, or I've tracked my cycle, where I'm like, you know what? I might need to move some things around, because we can guarantee, likely for most of us, that we might not have the same amount of energy. We might not have the same amount of gusto to get out and be social. And we might need a little more rest. Might need to put our feet up and relax. This is also a time, too, for those of you who train hard or really love their exercise. This would be a time to pull back, or go into a little bit more recovery mode around the way you move your body. And I feel like I sort of always have known this intuitively, but I really felt it when I had a studio in Vancouver, and I had a male business partner, and we used to run track. I think maybe I've told the story before. And we'd say in a month, we'd run every Wednesday. And when it was spring and summer of my cycle, I could sprint hard, I could work hard, and I felt amazing. And I was like, I love running. And then when it was fall of the cycle, I would start to feel really exhausted. And then when it was winter, I was bleeding. I was like, I could barely run. Cramps, my boobs hurt. It was like, this is ridiculous. Why am I pushing when my body is already having its internal work, its internal effort? It's doing enough. It's shedding a lining. It's working hard. Why do I need to push at this time? So it's something to inquire about in your own life. For those of you who bleed, is what is my relationship to exercise during this time? What is my relationship to my social life at this time? What is my relationship to the world at this time? So we'll come back here in a moment, but I wanted to set the stage of this is the day 1 through 7, typically, give or take, where the body requires the most rest. And when we go month after month, cycle after cycle, season after season, not taking this rest, this is where we tend to burn out. So when I'm working with women that are burnt out, which is most of my students and clients, this is often what I'll ask them is, what is your relationship to this time? What is the relationship to your body? So after winter, we know comes spring, which is what we are in right now, seasonally. And look outside. What do you see happening? You see there are buds on trees. You see that the days are getting longer. There's more light. There's the renewal, reset, rebirth. So this is a time of what we call the maiden. So winter is a crone, right? It's the wise woman. It's the older, uh, the ripening. It's um, the elder. It has that deep wisdom quality where you just like, and I think it's fair to say that for most of us, when we are in winter, we have sort of that no BS kind of attitude. You're like, that's not going to cut it. Listen up. This is what I need, which is badass. I think it's amazing. And then we transition into spring. And it's what we call the follicular phase. And it's this time of like, okay, I'm going to be all right. Sorry about what I said last week, but I'm thinking that life is not so bad anymore. We step into energetically what's probably the most masculine time of our cycle, meaning we're a little bit more linear in our thought. This is a really powerful time to be more strategic energetically. If you rested in winter on your period, you're likely going to come into the season with the energy. And that's the whole point. You rest so that you can come back into the world. Winter, get out of the world. See you later. I've got no plans. I'm making a stew. Spring, I'm getting out there. I'm getting out there. I have a point of view. I want to tell you, I'm going to open the spreadsheet. I'm going to look at my finances. This is a really good time to do that because likely the hormones come back. There's a little bit of a surge that's going down, and you're feeling a little more stable hormonally, energetically, and emotionally. I don't love to look at budgeting and financial things when I'm in the latter half of my cycle. So, spring is a really good time to do this. It represents the growth, it represents the energy coming back. You can see that in the world. So, again, for my friends that have a cycle, and especially for my entrepreneurial friends, you can start to see how you could be planning your months around your cycle. And this is a time where you are in the strategy portion of it. This is also a good time to help out. This is where you are more available to people. So spring has that maiden, almost innocent quality of like, wow, the world it ain't so bad. I feel good today. It's springtime. I don't have to deal with my blood anymore. I'm feeling a little bit more clear. So that's spring. Then we move into summer, and summer has the archetype of mother. Summer has that fertile quality to it. You have all of the light, these long days. So again, we still have the energy of the cycle. The cycle is like working for us. We are outside, we are in the world. And this is a time of ovulation in the cycle. So understanding and tracking your cycle and know when you're ovulating. There's lots of research, there's lots of books, there's lots of information. So I really urge you to do your research here, and researching let your own body be your own experiment, your own sort of project or examination of understanding the feeling of ovulation in your body. So this is, if you are trying to get pregnant, this is where you would. If you are not trying to get pregnant, this is where you would avoid having sex. So the energy of summer has that playful quality, and likely the body is being, prepared to make a baby. So all of the energy, even if you don't want to, the energy sort of has that sensual, sexual, in the world, like, the little emoji with the red dress, like dancer girl. That's you. There's a magnetic quality to it. And so I always tell people this is a great time to ask for a raise or ask someone out on a date. There's a boldness to it that doesn't exist as much at other points in your cycle. And that boldness, that fruitfulness, that nurturing sort of energy of fullness is really coming through. This is a sexy, fun time. We love summer. Who doesn't like summer? And then here is where we get things wrong, is because the next week after summer is fall. And this is where hormonally we start to shift and we go, wait a second, last week I was flying high. I felt so good. And I was getting so much done. And now like I'm a little grumpy, or I like kind of feel emotional, or I don't have the same bandwidth or the same amount of patience with my children or my partner or my boss. What's happening to me? I must be messed up. And when we don't track our cycle and we don't know these things, we blame ourselves. We individualize the problem. We just think like, I don't know what is going on. And then the next week we get our period and we're like, oh yeah. And it's wild that we do this. I've had a period for like, I don't know how many years, a lot of years. And every now and again, before I knew this information, I'd be like, what's wrong with me? And so understanding when you're in fall is really important. And what is fall? What do we see happening? The leaves start to fall off the trees. And that beauty, that fullness of summer starts to shift to a different type of beauty. Let's not get it twisted. Fall is beautiful. Letting go is beautiful. Shedding is beautiful. However, all of society puts its emphasis on summer, on the fertility, on the sweetness. And fall's attributes are sort of come into a little bit more of the dark, meaning the light starts to wane. The call to sort of come in and reflect starts to happen. But the ego is like, but wait a second, this is not what I signed up for. We've been having fun for 2 weeks. I'm dancing on a table. I'm going out. I'm having a good time. And now all of a sudden, I don't feel the same way. So when we look at fall, it really is a time to tie up some loose ends. So this is where I start to look at my calendar and go, okay, I know that my energy is going to start to dwindle a little around this time. What could I do to support myself? If I know I have a really heavy load in the schedule, maybe there's a few things that I need to shift in order to start to take care of myself. And this is something my husband always says. He's like, you're 2 weeks on and you're 2 weeks off. And I was like, that's not true. But when I look at it, it's like, it is kind of true. I think if we're looking at a month, I sort of have 2 weeks where I feel, more grounded and out. And then 2 weeks where I feel a little more tender and vulnerable and in. And this is the mega energy. Right? This is the transition out of the innocent into the wise. And so fall would be a time of PMS if that is something that you experience. Not everyone does. I certainly do. And so here's this where I'm amping up a little bit more self-care. I love castor oil packs. Castor oil packs is not something you do when you have your period, but certainly something you can do throughout your cycle. Castor oil is something you can buy, online or at a health food store. You soak a flannel in the oil, you place it onto your belly, your lower belly, usually like something to cover it, another cloth, a dry cloth, and then a hot water bottle or a heat source. And the oil absorbs into the skin and gets deep and penetrates and tends to really help with cramps and pain. So that's something to look into. And this is where I drink my herbs that have been recommended to me by Dr. Steph, if you listen to that episode. And if you're interested, definitely reach out to an herbalist or naturopath. I think Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, the science of life, these ancient cultures have such beautiful understanding of what the cycle needs versus Western medicine is like, take this pain pill and get back to work, honey. So I would look to more ancient cultures to help support where you're at in your cycle. But fall is doing what fall does. It is the preparing for winter. So whatever that looks like. And yes, do we live in a society that's going to support this very cyclical nature of who we are? No. Society is asking us to cycle the way that men do, which is 24 hours. The 9 to 5 work week, it was created for men and their hormones. It actually works really well from them to wake up, have their coffee, hop into a meeting, blah, blah, blah. For us, it doesn't. You can see now with this sort of painting of the pictures of the cycle that we are cycling way differently and how much the world is really not set up for us to do this. So no one is going to do it for us, but how can you take accountability, or agency maybe is the right word, to take care of yourself knowing this information? And I am just skimming the surface with this information here. I hope that this is kind of lighting a little fire in you for you to go and do a little bit more of your own sort of study of yourself in your own cycle. So, workshop format, pause, check in. What part of your cycle are you in right now? And if you don't know, that's okay. There's lots of apps out there that you can use to track. I don't track like that anymore because I literally can tell every day where I'm at in my cycle, but that's taken me probably 10 years to really figure out. But there's ways to track. So you can open up an app and go, where am I? Or you might feel like your boobs are swollen and you're cramping and you're exhausted and go, okay, maybe I'm in fall. Or you might have boundless energy and you're feeling really strategic and you're just getting after, okay, maybe I'm in spring. So just a good little check-in for you. Where are you at in your own cycle? So that's seasons of cycle. This is a very quick rundown or overview. Now we're going to get into the moon. Oh, this is what's so cool. I mean, maybe it's not so cool, the fact that we've lost all of this wisdom, but I really feel like the rise of this information is coming back in a really big and bold and beautiful way, that we're talking about this more. We are nature. We are a part of nature. The moon pulls the tides. The moon literally tells the ocean what to do. And we're about 70% water as humans. So, of course, the moon has an effect and has a deep pull. And so I have long loved the moon and my relationship to the moon. And so it's one thing to know where you're at in your cycle. That would be step one. The second piece is to know what the moon is doing. The second step is to know what the moon is doing when you are on your period. So let's look into it. So the first cycle I'm going to talk about is the white moon cycle. The white moon cycle is the most traditional cycle. It would be the moon that women would bleed on, and it would be the most fertile women in the community. This would be where women's cycles were synced. They would be bleeding with the white moon, meaning they would be ovulating on the full moon. And this was the cycle of women who were mothers, who were at that time of giving birth and creating a family. This is not to say that if you bleed on the white moon that you need to be a mother or are a mother or want to get pregnant. We can also look at the energy of mother and the energy of fertility as creative or birthing a new project. So just something to note here. But the attributes of a white moon cycle, so this would be people who bleed on a new moon. We just had a new moon. It was an eclipse. So if you had your period during the eclipse, or which was the new moon, a solar eclipse, this would be you. So the energy is, like I said, mothering and nurturing. It has a blank canvas energy, meaning it's really like the void. What can I create? Because the new moon, you can't see it. There's no light in the moon. It's the dark moon. So it's like, what am I creating? Perhaps you're ready for birth, meaning you want to birth a child or you want to birth a project. It has a lightness with life. It's the enjoyment of the process of being alive. And this cycle is really about tending to yourself and tending to your immediate family, the people who are right in front of you, versus the red moon cycle, which we'll get into, which is really about tending to the people, the community and beyond, the world globally. You're really thinking globally. White moon cycle, you're thinking more nuclearly. Who is in front of me? How do I nourish myself and my family? And this question that the white moon brings to us is like, what makes me come alive? Where is my joy coming from? Where is my delight coming from? And I like this cycle because I think it helps us connect more to our inner child. So this is sort of for me, the white moon cycle is like, this nurturing, almost childlike fertility, mothering energy. And I'll tell you a little story in a moment once I get through these moons about how I cycle with the moons, because it's interesting because it does change. It can change. So the next cycle, next most common cycle is the red moon cycle. So it's the exact opposite of the white moon cycle. The red moon cycle is when you bleed on the full moon and you ovulate on the new moon. And if this information's a little over your head, being like, how do I know? If you have your next time you have your period, just Google or look up in the sky, but you can just Google what is the moon doing. And so if you have your period on the full moon, this is the red moon cycle. And women who traditionally would have this cycle. It's the opposite cycle of like the birth giving women in the village. So they would be the doulas, the midwives. They were the witches. They were the caretakers of the women, but they were the holders of the knowledge. They were the keepers of the wisdom. They were the storytellers. They were the ones that were like bringing uh, the feminine wisdom into the world and in caretaking others for the evolution of all. I love the red moon cycle. I think my body is pulling its way back to the red moon cycle. I was on the red moon cycle for years and years and years. But it's the energy of the healer. And this could be about healing your own heart. This could be about healing your own body. This could be about healing others. Some of the archetypes of the high priestess, the mystics, the witches, the magic, the magicians, the higher knowing. And I've talked about this a lot in this episode, this idea of being inward or outward with the energy. Red moon cyclers are more outward with their energy. They're more quote unquote like out in the world versus more hibernating. Um, and Women Who Run with the Wolves, which is like one of my favorite, most important books in the world, talks a lot about this idea too of the female psyche needs to be in the world sometimes and out of the world sometimes. But the red moon cyclers, they're out there, and they're really sharing their wisdom with the collective, less about me and family, but more about you and the world. And there's a lot of magnetism in this cycle. And I've been told that a lot of people tend to meet their match or meet their life partner when they are on this cycle, when they're connected to this cycle of the red moon, which I think is really interesting and also is true for me. So I'm curious if you know this information and you do have a life partner, if you were on that cycle. Um, and there's a lot of learning about relationships within this cycle. So something to note as well. And I think this cycle has a little bit of that outsider energy of like, I'm different, I'm unique, I'm like really want to understand life. I want to learn as much knowledge as I can and then dissect it and turn the knowledge into wisdom and share that wisdom with the world, which I just love. And, that's totally me. Um, so those are the two main cycles, white and red. Now here's where it gets a little interesting because you might be like, well, I didn't bleed with the new moon. I didn't bleed with the full moon. I'm in the in-between. And we'll talk about what the in-between means. So if you are currently listening to this right now, when this episode goes live, which is whatever, April 17th, I believe, 2024, you would be bleeding with what's called the pink moon cycle because we're in between the new and the full moon. So when you're in between, you look at what the light is doing. So the light of the moon is going from dark, completely in the void of the new moon, into full, completely bright at its brightest, fullest quality. So the pink moon is going from white to red, pink, duh, and the light is coming in. So there's an energy of growing and coming up into our power. So when you bleed on the pink moon, it has a lot to do with stepping into your power. You're not quite there in terms of, oh, I'm going to step in and like take all this knowledge and send it out into the world, but you're gaining, right? You're gaining light, you're gaining traction. It's a transition time. So people who bleed between white and red or red and white in the transition, you're likely going through a big transition in your life. It has a bit of that rise above energy, like I'm coming out, I'm coming back into the world. There's maybe some bigger risks that are being taken. This is funny reading this because, spoiler alert, this is the cycle I am currently on, and I've actually never bled on this cycle before. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the transition cycles and what they've meant to me in my life. But as I read this, I mean, I wrote this workshop, but I'm like, oh, damn, I'm learning. Big risk, big risk, big reward, which makes a lot of sense in my life right now. But honing in on the projects that you want to nurture. What are sustainable actions you can take? And it's really about choosing who you're becoming. It's like you have this new opportunity to go, this is who I am. Hey, world, this is who I am. Okay. So this is the work I'm doing. I love it. And then defining what does success look like for you. This is always a really beautiful question to ask, to check back in because it does change. And then what am I moving toward? What am I moving toward? The moon is going from dark to light. What are you moving toward? What is your process? So that's the pink moon cycle. So if you're bleeding between the new and the full, this is the pink moon. Super cool. Okay. Then we have the purple moon cycle. So purple moon would be the opposite of the pink moon cycle. Purple moon is when you bleed after the full moon. So between the full moon and the new moon, what is the light of the moon doing? It's waning. It's the waning moon, meaning its light is dwindling. We are going back to the darkness. So this is also a transition time. This is really when I was bleeding in my purple moon cycle was a really dark time for me. It's really a deep time of reflection. It's asking, what do you really want? It tends to come into our lives when we are burnt out. Because you think of the way the light's not rising up, it's going down, it's dimming itself. It really asks us to look at what is true. Is this life that you're living? Is this one that's anchored in truth? Is this true for you? Ask, is this true for me? Is this really what I want? It's asking for us to anchor ourselves in who we are now. And so it slows us down so that we can ask those questions, if that makes sense. It's going, hey, let's just like calm down here. What you've been doing is maybe not fully working. So let's calm it down and let's ask the right questions. And something I like about the purple moon cycle is that it asks us to shed the superficial. Shed the superficial. And it also is connected to solitude. My purple moon cycle, I think I was on it for an entire year. And I really spent more time with myself than I ever have in sitting with my own darkness and contemplating, what do I really want? And it has sort of this face the skeletons in your closet type of vibe. So if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, that's me. I bleed on the purple moon. There's nothing wrong with that. It's actually a very powerful cycle. I feel really grateful that I had that cycle. And so I'm going to share a little bit about kind of how this pertains to my own timeline. So I've always bled on since I became conscious of this work, on a full moon, on the red witch cycle, the red moon cycle, because I've been, teaching yoga since I was 19 years old. I started a lot of yoga businesses when I was quite young. I was very entrepreneurial, and I was like, learn that information. And I was like, the whole world needs to know this. I want to bring this information to the world. I want to share my heart. And I just was always on that cycle for years and years and years. And then when I made the decision to leave Open, a company I was working for, we were a startup, so I was feeling, the just intensity of startup culture, was teaching a ton, working a lot, and my period was starting to bleed after the full moon, and I kept thinking, oh, it's so weird. My period is late. It's a couple days late. It's 3 days late. It's 4 days late, until it was like had fully shifted. Let's call it a week and a half or something. And I was very burnt out. I was exhausted, and I feel like I was doing all this research, like, why is my period late as a red moon cycler? And then, because I didn't know the purple moon cycle existed, and then I started to do all this research on the purple moon, and I was like, okay, this is time for me to shed the superficial. This is time for me to figure out what I want. This is time for me to slow down. This cycle has come to me as a gift. That's often what happens when we, hit our knees is a gift. It's saying, hey, we've been whispering to you. We, as in the universe, has been whispering to you. You haven't been listening. So we're going to just, be a little louder until you pay attention. So the purple moon really showed me, hey, girl, what do you want? So in that inquiry, in the sort of dark underbelly of the full moon waning, I started to get clearer and clearer on what I wanted. And when I started to realize what I wanted was a few things, one of them being a family, and one of them being this next project of Bill and I in Mexico, it was like, oh, okay, well, this has more of a nurturing quality than if I want to do all these things, I need to nurture myself. So I started to get very serious about self-care, and I started to get very serious about nurturing Bill and our relationship, and our little unit of me and him and our dog, who is losing his mind barking downstairs, and that's something I don't know if we can edit out. But the way I was able to nurture me and nurture the nuclear, then all of a sudden, guess what? Now I'm bleeding on a white moon cycle. Okay, I've never bled on that cycle before. Let me do more research. Oh, this makes total sense. I'm coming more into the sort of fertile grounds of dreaming again. And it wasn't necessarily meant that I was going to get pregnant and have a baby, which it could have. But it was more about nurturing the dreams and birthing this new idea. So I thought that was so cool. I was like, wow, within a year and a half, the cycles have shifted, and the power of whatever moon was in the sky, whatever my period was doing, was uh, sort of nature's way, universe, God's way of communicating. Hey, girl, listen up. So I was on a white moon cycle probably for the last 6 months. And oh my gosh, how much has my life changed in those 6 months? A ton. We left LA, we went to Mexico, blah, blah, blah. The last 2 cycles, my period was late. And this is not a pregnancy announcement. I have my period right now, but I started to bleed on the pink moon cycle. And I thought this was so interesting. Okay, let's look what we've learned about the pink moon. It's redefining who you are in the world, stepping into your leadership, big risks, big reward. Okay, well, we have found this piece of land that we love. We're getting very serious. It's like, but it's a big risk. And so I just think it continues to blow my mind at the synchronicities and the alignment of these things. And so I really felt like, okay, I want to bring this information to you in a podcast format for you to go, okay, where is my cycle and what's going on in my life? So where do we go from here? I want to talk a little bit about new moon ceremonies. Oh, I lead new moon and full moon ceremonies. Typically, if they happen over the course of a retreat that I'm leading, I'll do them in person. But I do them often online, which they are coming back. I know I've taken a break because life has been so crazy, but they are coming back. The moon is always showing us, right? New beginnings or endings. New moon signifies new beginnings. So if you're ever like, I want to learn, I want to work with the moon, I don't know how. This is one way to do it. When the moon is new, meaning it's dark in the sky, it is a time to reset. So this would be a powerful time to set intentions. When the moon is full, it has an illuminating quality, meaning I think of it as like a flashlight shining down on all the things that you need to look at. And, the moon and its brightness will start to then wane, meaning it's a time of releasing and letting go. So if you want to work with the full moon, this would be more about writing things down that you want to let go of. You could burn that piece of paper or rip it into tiny little pieces and bury it. But ritualizing the full moon is about letting go. Ritualizing the new moon is setting intentions. And so you could see, we have this cycle, 28 days of the moon cycle, 28 days or something within that, give or take a few days of your menstrual cycle. How are you working with it, given that you have all of this information now? And once I learned this information in my 20s, it's been the guiding force for me of all creation, of how I want to create things. It's like if I'm working on a project and working on something, I really get so serious about new moons. And similarly with the full moon, if I'm getting serious about something in my life, which I'm often getting serious about lots of stuff in my life, I'm looking at what are the limiting beliefs that I want to let go of? What are some behaviors? What are some things that are not serving me that I can release on the full moon? So it's a lot of information. This episode will live here, forever. You can come back to it and revisit it. I revisit this information all the time. And I think because I'm so, there's so much change and transition, my cycle is changing. It's nice to go, okay, whoa, I'm on this cycle now. And what does that mean? And let the universe and let nature also help guide and dictate as I move on. So that's all I wanted to bring to you today. I'm always like, how am I going to fill these solo episodes? But I could literally sit here forever and ever. I really just encourage you to, there's books, there's things, and there's, read and research, yes, but also the greatest information just comes from your own experience. you know, get quiet, sit with yourself, learn and understand. A lot of people ask, where did you learn all this information? Yeah, some research here and there, gathering the pieces along the way, but so much of it was my own listening to my own body and paying attention to how do I feel? Where am I at my cycle? What is the moon doing? How do I take care of myself in this moment? How do I work with that? And I really encourage you to work with that. So today, for someone like me who is on, day 2 of my period, I'm so tired. I have a couple meetings today, but I'm not going out for a run today. I am not exercising today. I'm going to take it really easy, go to bed early, drink lots of water because that's what my body is asking me to do. And so, when we're looking at burnout, when we're looking at being exhausted, overly tired or emotional or just stuck, the cycle, the period, the where we're at seasonally can tell us much about what and how we need to work with ourselves. So, just a gentle sort of loving nudge for you to examine. And I'll before I go, I'll just touch on the question that comes up the most with this work is, what if I'm on birth control? And what if I don't get a period? And what I will say to that, as someone who has been on birth control, certainly in my life, and is off of it, cycle tracking totally changed my life. And being a responsible adult who understands my cycle and can handle tracking, I highly, highly recommend that and getting off of birth control. There is a documentary called The Business of Birth Control, which is really enraging and powerful to watch. And for me, birth control was really messed with me and my own intuition, how I felt about myself and my body. It's synthetic hormones. The bleed you do get on birth control is a placebo bleed. It's a fake bleed. And so it's something you can still work with, but it's not going to give you the same sort of information as someone who is off of birth control. So something to consider and think about. I had a lot of success with working with an Ayurvedic doctor to get off of birth control, and I went on a copper IUD because I was single, and in my 20s, and still wanted to be practicing safe sex, and so that's what I did. And then I've been just tracking my cycle. And if I don't want to get pregnant, then I'm just avoiding that ovulatory time. So the more you understand about your body, the better. But when we don't have this information, we feel like we are just at the helm of, pharmaceuticals, which doesn't always have to be the case. Understanding the wisdom of your body, which has been stripped from us, getting it back and having choice and having agency and really understanding how our bodies works, I think is just been the most empowering thing for me. And so that's why I wanted to make this podcast, so that it can hopefully spark you in your own understanding of your own body. And I will say that getting off of birth control and finding getting on an IUD was a challenging time. I just felt like it really wreaked havoc on my skin and my everything until things settled out, which they eventually did. But I just knew that the way I felt on birth control was very challenging. And so the journey to come back to a healthy period and learning all this information that was what it was sparked by. I was like, I feel out of control. I don't want these synthetic hormones in my body. I want my body to do this naturally and understand the cycles. But it goes back to the original thought, this idea, if it's taboo and no one's talking about it, and a doctor thinks that one birth control pill can just be the cure all for bad skin and PMS and like most teenagers are put on, then we never really know or have the chance to understand our cycles. So food for thought there. And then I get asked for people that have been through menopause is, how do I relate to the seasons? And how do I relate to this idea? And there's a few things. One is that you can look at your month and decide one of these months is going to be my winter. This is going to be a time where I relax and really take good care of myself. The next week will be spring, and the next week will be summer, and the next week will be fall. And you can sort of adhere, even though your body's not bleeding, but you can adhere to the natural pulsation, the natural cycle of caretaking, because the seasons are so wise. The seasons have so much intelligence in them that you can kind of think of each week, and you can set that for yourself. And this is something you could do too for those of you that maybe have lost your period, which was me in my early 20s due to an eating disorder. I was desperate to get my period back, but taking, the winter, even though the bleed might not be there, but take your own winter. And you can see how this is a metaphor for life. I talked about this a lot when it was winter, taking the season of winter seriously. And now we're in spring. And so this is a time where it's kind of this big reset, kind of new year energy. So you can see how this kind of makes sense in all facets of your life, whether you are a person with a uterus or not. I think men can do this too and get a lot of value from this wisdom. All genders can get value from this wisdom of rest when you need to rest, be in the world when you need to be in the world, play when you need to play, let go when you need to let go. That's really what it is. And using these archetypes as great teachers for what is needed. So those are the seasons of your cycle. Those are the moons. Play with this, have fun with this, share this information far and wide. I've shared this to CEO of companies, male CEOs, to my own husband. Obviously, this information is very important. I share this with women and girls all over the world. There's a little portion of this in the Girl Vana book. If you're like, how do I share this with teenagers? There is a little chapter on periods at the in my book, Girl Vana, which is available where you buy books, but Amazon or Chapters, Indigo, Barnes and Noble. If you're interested in sharing this with the young people in your life, the women in your life, your sisters, your friends, share this information far and wide. And I will be back next week. We've got some more guests lined up for the pod for spring, summer. I love your feedback. I love knowing how you feel about the podcast. Thank you for sharing it. It means the world to me. If you haven't already, like, save, subscribe, share this podcast with people that you think can really benefit. And I will see you next time. Bye.